South Korean President Moon Jae-in's four-day state visit to China from Wednesday is a clear sign the Chile bilateral relationship is thawing. Both countries share a sense of urgency in working together on defusing the dangerous time bomb ticking on the Korean Peninsula. But will Beijing and Seoul see eye to eye on how to achieve this goal? Will Moon's appeal to view the matter from each other's perspective mitigate Beijing's worries about the THAAD's potential threat to its national security? And why did Rex Tillerson say the U.S. is open to talks with the DPRK without any preconditions? And ironically, his claims are very quickly denied by the White House. To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined in the studio by Ambassador Hua Liming, CGTN commentator and former Chinese ambassador to Iran, Dr. Wang Dong, Associate Professor of School of International Studies from Peking University, and Anna Tangen, CGTN commentator. We shall also cross over to Joseph Kim, CGTN correspondent in Seoul via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a look at my previous interview with Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General. By the way, he's a Korean national, and he is able to speak more freely.
During the last 25 years in their diplomatic relationship, China and Korea have been making steady and rapidly leveling up their relationship to that of strategic partnership. And leadership of both countries have been frequently having summit meetings. Unfortunately, beginning of this year and earlier last year, over some security issues because of the caused by North Korean missile test as well as nuclear weapon test, the relationship deteriorated significantly to my deepest regret as a former Secretary General and as a person who has been really admiring such a great Chinese global leadership, not only in the region but all throughout the world. I sincerely hope that through their summit meeting, based upon some agreements and negotiations which have been conducted at the working levels, they will really have all the past issues behind and really be able to march forward much more constructive and strategic partnership relationship. It's important to address the North Korean challenges issues. The North Korea has become the worst norm breaker in this era of our world. They are just totally, defiantly been challenging and rejecting the Security Council resolutions and international calls to become responsible members. The bilateral relationship between China and North Korea will also play a very important role as a tool, considering the size of their relationship in trade. China is the only country at this time who can really engage as well as exercise their influence. I am very much encouraged by the statement of the Chinese government that China will very faithfully and sincerely implement the relevant Security Council resolutions.
Welcome to the discussion here in the studio. Dr. Wang Dong, first of all, quite a few years ago, I was interviewing Professor Wang Ji's very famous expert of international studies about the impact of a state visit. He said, Ray, you cannot expect a major breakthrough through one official summit meeting. Now let's come back to examine whether it will be just wishful thinking or a real major breakthrough for the improvement of the strained bilateral relationship between the RK and the PRC through one four-day official visit by Moon Jae-in, President of the RK. What's your take?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I cannot disagree with my own professor and mentor, so Professor Wang Ji. Well, so definitely, I think it is true that one single visit cannot, altogether change the the whole cost of a bilateral relationship between two countries. But I just wanted to add to his very insightful observation by saying that there are also some critical moments in history where some important historical, historic visit trips taken by leaders will also make very, very
such as the 1972 Richard Nixon's
visit. Exactly, visit to China.
But prior to that is the ping-pong diplomacy.
Exactly. So you have to have this building up of a lot of tangles, small steps leading up to a major breakthrough like Nixon's historic visit to China. And as for President Moon Jae-in's, of course, no doubt this is going to be a very, very important visit. But whether or not it will become a historical one, I think it will, we have to look at what the goals of this visit. And I actually would perhaps look at this, regard this visit as more of not ice-breaking, because we already had a very mature and developed relationship between China and ROK, but rather it's a trip of restoration of the damaged political mutual trust between the two countries, largely because of the deployment of South.
Ambassador Hua, to what degree do you think this official visit will be able to repair the strained relationship?
I think both sides need this kind of repair of the relationship because both sides lost much, especially Korea. They lost $10 billion in their trade with China. And the Korean economy has been deeply influenced by this deterioration of bilateral relationship. Of course, I think the trade between China and Korea is a two-way street. China lost something, but the Chinese lost this much lesser than Korea. And Korea also has to make a very difficult choice between two triangles. One triangle is US, Japan, and Korea. The other is China, Japan, and Korea. Which Korea has to take? I think to this moment, I think the choice of Korea still is US, Japan, and Korea. But Chinese relationship is so important for not only trade, for the Korean Peninsula issue. Also, this is very strategically important with the cooperation with China and to have the solution for the Korean Peninsula issue.
And for years, South Korea has been proud of being a stabilizing factor between and among major powers in this region. This time around, what do you think of the implications of the pendulum swinging to the Chinese side? Do you think President Moon Jae-in is taking the right side of history?
I don't know about the right side of history. History decides that. But I would agree with my colleague that what you see here is a reaction to the uncertainties of the situation, with the U.S. pulling out of all of its trade obligations, even attacking the UN and things like this. You have a situation where you don't know what Donald Trump and where the United States is going. You know it's not going outward. It's not supporting WTO. Now, this is a country that has 50% of its GDP based on exports. China is its major relationship. And quite frankly, even though we've seen a big impact, as you pointed out, in terms of tourism, in terms of K-pop, and in terms of cars, the fact is, as of December 1st this year, trade between China and ROK was up 20%. So it continues. There's really no way to separate these two entities. There's a realization that if strategically there's cooperation perhaps with the United States, economically it must be with China. So it's once again trying to reconcile two things which seem difficult, but this is the needle that I think not only Korea, but all countries throughout Southeast Asia and the world are looking at.
Is it a needle or a shot in the arm? Let me cross over to Joseph Kim, our CGTN correspondent in Seoul. Hello, Kim. What are the domestic reactions on President Moon's visit to China, and what are the expectations?
Well, I think there's a stark contrast between a business opinion as well as the public opinion in terms of what the South Korean public is expecting from this visit. There is expectations from the business side. We saw one of the biggest delegations following President Moon Jae-in to China, to Beijing, in terms of their expectations and their hopes to continue and restore trade relations with China. But in terms of the public opinion, we're seeing two different sides. In terms of what happened with the souring of relationships, it not only affected the public image of what South Korea looked like to the Chinese nationals, but it also affected how South Koreans viewed China. So I think in terms of this visit, it will be very important for not only Moon Jae-in, but also President Xi Jinping, in that this meeting also really focuses on mutual trust and rebuilding trust together, rather it being on one side, because as we have seen in terms of public opinion polls and other metrics, that the two sides have seen both relations deteriorate in the public sphere.
There's been the assumption, Kim, that the biggest enemy for this problematic bilateral relationship has been the issue of nationalism on both sides. Having said this, Kim, Moon, your president, has promised not to use the THAAD anti-missile system for purposes other than preventing nuclear and missile threats from Pyongyang. This may be pleasant to the ears of the hosts, but how difficult will it be to verify the presidential promise in practice?
Well, in terms of the agreement that President Moon Jae-in and President Xi Jinping came to, the three no's that was really decided and agreed upon was that there wouldn't be any additional THAAD missiles, that the South Korea wouldn't join the U.S.-led missile system, and that they also wouldn't join a trilateral military alliance between South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Now, what was agreed upon and what was also said by South Korea's foreign ministry is all of this is not a huge departure from South Korea's original policy. So I don't think that it's far off that what South Korea has said in terms of its agreements and what its policy has been. I don't think they're far off, so I think this is something that perhaps is already being practiced, and even though it perhaps might not be pleasant and could create friction between the United States and South Korea, it is currently where South Korea stands.
Curbing the DPRK's nuclear ambitions and capability clearly tops President Moon's agenda in Beijing. Though Beijing and Seoul both oppose the military option, it's one of the most viable options on the table, by the way. They have yet to sit down and talk about what non-military alternatives there could be. And will the two sides see eye to eye on how to achieve this? Very quickly, please.
Well, I think this is something that many experts, as well as diplomats and foreign international countries, have been trying to figure out, especially because South Korea has already tried to get on the negotiating table with the DPRK. They offered talks and negotiations with the DPRK, which was met with silence. So now it is up to South Korea and China to come up with possible solutions of diplomacy. And one of the solutions that has been brought forth from China has been a freeze for freeze, that the DPRK stops its missile tests and that the United States and South Korea stops their joint military exercises. Now, even though this could perhaps be far off, given that the United States and South Korea continues to take the stance that their military drills is for defensive purposes, what we have heard recently in recent reports is that for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, that they could perhaps delay and move back these defense drills. And if that is the case, this could be a window of opportunity for South Korea, China, the United States, Japan, as well as North Korea and Russia to come in and really talk about the tensions that are rising on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you so much for your first-hand account from ROK. Thank you so much. That's Joseph Kim, CGTN correspondent in Seoul. Welcome back. Now, I've just seen a movie, The Darkest Hour, of the UK, in which Winston Churchill, the wartime leader of Great Britain, said, those who cannot change themselves will not change the world. I think this will be applicable in the case of your presidency tweets, Donald Trump. one day, your Secretary of State Tillerson said, we're going to hold talks with the DPRK anytime, any place, without any preconditions. Very quickly, his claims are ironically denied by the White House. We don't know what's happening in the D.C. Are there any policy consistencies? I mean, what about what are your thoughts on the whims of your president?
All right. Let's put aside. I don't know that anybody can tell you exactly what is in Donald Trump's mind or how he wants to approach this. But it's very clear with him naming Jerusalem as the capital of Israel that he's willing to do things which do not have a logical base. There's no win for the United States in this, and people are questioning what it is. Then you start taking that thinking process and you apply it to other situations. So I don't think that is useful. I think it is useful, though, to look at the situation which will not change, and that no sitting president will allow North Korea to have a viable nuclear delivery system and bomb.
Ambassador Hua, given your seniority and expertise in foreign affairs, what do you think of the trustworthiness of the White House and the U.S. State Department, where you still have over 100 positions to fill, a lot of vacancies to fill? You know, the loggerheads between the State Department and the White House. There's obviously an issue of mistrust between Rex Tillerson and his boss, the president himself, right?
We seldom heard from his predecessors, other Donald Trump's predecessors, that they have different ideas from the State Department and the White House. But this really is his first time. A very extraordinary President of the United States. He says something that may not be accepted by the Secretary of the Department. Really, I cannot get the answer of the differences between the White House and the State Department.
The issue is credibility. Dr. Wang, do we have to deal with a government which is characterized by growing whims of this presidency? I mean, is this a bad joke? 3 aircraft carrier strike groups are converging in Northeast Asia in a clear attempt to launch a preemptive strike, given the uncertainty of any war games. I mean, this is something real. I've interviewed some senior government officials or former policymakers from the State Department, from the D.C. They all said, look, Ray, this is something real. And the next day, Rex Tillerson said, we get ready for any talks. I mean, we don't know what's happening here.
Well, I think that might be just, I could be wrong, but my guess is that might precisely be what I think the United States government is trying to do, you know, sending sort of the mixed signal, this deterrence signal with a very
Do you think the mixed signal is actually a deliberate attempt, carefully crafted by the White House?
Right.
To
so,
fool, to cheat, to deceive?
Right.
I mean,
No, I don't think. No, I don't think anybody.
We have overestimated the wisdom of your president. I'm sorry for saying
Sure,
that.
sure. I think definitely people can come up with different interpretations of what really is happening. But from my own point of view, scholarly point of view, I think at least I think the deterrence signal, I think it's you know, clearly is also having effect on the calculations on the DPRK's part. And in terms of then, of course, you have to couple your deterrence signal with reassurance. I think what Tillerson is doing, I think actually not against logic. It's quite logical options if you are doing a deterrence strategy. I think you have to couple your deterrence signal with the reassurance signal.
Well, President Moon Jae-in said over and over that the deployment of THAAD will not aim to undermine our national security of the PRC. How can this be verified? I mean, when the United States says, look, the nuclear program of the DPRK got to be verifiable, comprehensive, and irreversible, we should put forward much the same request, right? It should be verifiable.
Well, all right, let's break it down. The concern with that is not necessarily the missiles themselves. It has to do with the kind of radar that was then. So I think there's been some clarification on what that means. But, you know, the President of Korea made an announcement. He wants to delay any kind of further upgrades or anything like that. He's putting it on hold. There were some things that were supposed to happen. He says, let's put it on hold. Obviously, this is a gesture towards China. This whole issue that we're talking about here is the credibility of the U.S., and it coincides with a lot of the U.S. Previous close allies looking towards China. Why? Because it's more stable, it's more predictable. People understand where China is going. It's very, as we just discussed, difficult to know.
Let me do a very quick survey, if not a quiz. The latest news of 今日头条, okay, today is top news, a very popular app in China, conducted a survey as to where the United States is most likely to launch a war. Where? Which place or which country? What will be the immediate or the next immediate flashpoint for the U.S. military? Now, President Trump has just approved military spending of up to $700 billion. That's huge. That's huge. And he cited the DPRK as a vile dictatorship. Now, do you think the Korean Peninsula will be the most likely place where the next war is to break out?
The United States no more the dominating, real dominating power in the world. Its dominating capability has been reduced very much. So using military power without without agreement of China and without the Republic of Korea, I think it's to be impossible for the United States, for Donald Trump, to use military force. I think this is the only points that preventing Donald Trump to use military force.
I'm sorry for President Trump, whose fire and fury will come to no avail. Let's look at the issue of FTA, an agreement that the South Korea and China were able to reach even during the presidency of Pyo King-hui, who's now, sorry to say, she is behind the bars pending investigations about the corruption. So, Anna, earlier South Korea and China agreed to renew a $56 billion currency swap agreement. Do you think this is part of the FTA? And of course, this FTA has somehow been the envy of our neighboring country, Japan.
Well, there are the trilateral talks that are going on, and obviously China was setting up the agreement with Korea as perhaps a model that all three could join in, and this is kind of throwing a carrot towards Japan and saying, listen, we can do more together economically than we can separately by pretending we have strategic disinterests. So I think there's plenty of room for them to do it. In terms of what's happening, both sides are edging closer, but they still have to figure out, and this is the most important, what are the concrete steps that China and South Korea can make towards settling the North Korean issue. I would say that North Korea is potentially the highest value flashpoint that we're now facing.
Dr. Wang, you're a senior research fellow with the Pango think tank, one of the major non-governmental think tanks. You have received many South Korean delegations. Do you have the strong feeling that they have the strong urgency of resuming the economic and trade collaboration with the biggest neighboring economy? How important is this for President Moon Jae-in to prioritize this?
Well, of course, if we look at the statistics, I think statistics, perhaps more than anything, says that indicate very clearly how much these two countries, China and ROK, are economically interdependent to each other. And China now is the largest trading partner of South Korea, and also the largest export and import market of South Korea. So economically speaking, I think it's a huge stake. Not only, of course, for South Korea, but also for China as well. So I think this is one of the top priorities of President Moon's trip to China, is to not only restore the political mutual trust between the two countries, but also how to restore the trade, economic ties between two countries, not only to the old original level, but sort of improve to a new level, and sort of usher into a strategic partnership between China and ROK into a new era. I think this is what the President Moon he's trying to achieve during this trip.
Ambassador Huang, are you optimistic that the economic cooperation will be brought to a new level?
I'm quite sure that the economic relation level will be raised after this visit of President Moon, because this needs of both sides. Without the trade and without the economic cooperation between the two countries, I think the economies of the two countries cannot be, because Korea is one of the biggest economies. He's a member of the G20. So I think that we have to cooperate, and we have to have better relations with each other.
Are there any serious problems in our bilateral economic relationship with the ROK, according to your observation?
Well, I think the major one are the strategic interests, and also the damage that was done between the two people in terms of the distrust. I mean, turning away from K-pop, the number of tourists going to South Korea dropped to 1/2 of where it was, to 2.5 million. Let me stress here, China and South Korea are doing more trade than they were before. That's the official numbers that were as of December 1st of this year. 20% growth. All right, that's the highest margin of growth of any country that South Korea trades with. So it is continuing on, but there were sectors that were hurt. Without those sectors, it would have even been larger. And that shows the interdependence, as you pointed out, between these economies. So in terms of things, they have to overcome the strategic issue. They have to overcome this nationalist issue.
Ambassador Hua, do you think South Korea, as I said earlier, which prides itself on the issue, it's been the stabilizing factor between major powers. It's a third country between Japan and China. This position allows Seoul to get either closer to Japan or to China, depending on the issues that emerge, that may have a lot to do with their national security. So this time around, Moon Jae-in gets closer to China. Do you think this will tip the balance in favor of China? That's why Prime Minister Shinzo Abe really wants to resume the summit meeting with the Chinese leadership, because next year, 2018, will witness the 40th anniversary of the China-Japan Friendship Treaty.
I think whatever happens between China and Korea, and whatever good relations between China and South Korea, the alliance between U.S. and Korea will not change. But it will affect the relation between Korea and Japan. It's very important and so sensitive for China, the alliance between Japan and Korea, not to be established. This is very sensitive, and I think that China has got the political and the diplomatic commitment from President Moon and his government that not to have the alliance between U.S., Korea, and Japan. This is a political commitment.
The last question actually goes to Dr. Wang. Recently, a Russian spokesperson said DPRK has, through Russia, conveyed a message to the White House that it's going to have a one-on-one talk with the United States on the nuclear proliferation issue. Do you think that means automatically that China's role has been left marginalized and we have exhausted our leverage?
No, I really don't think,
you don't think so?
I don't think so. I think this really shows
that because we still maintain the fuel supply?
Right. Well, I think that's just one of the bigger picture. I think one piece of the very large bigger picture. I think what is happening really shows that the diplomatic efforts, of course, led by China and joined by the United States and Russia and the other stakeholders are really taking effect. I would really put it in a very positive perspective.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue on the current official visit by President Moon Jae-in. And we believe many major issues are prioritized on his agenda, following our economic sanctions against the deployment of THAAD. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.